Today,
Although I don't think it's not that scary compared to headless ballet, claustrophobic. Like when he talked about the 3 to 4 diver who already banging until they die. Stuff like that. I don't think it's that scary. Okay, let's see.
today I'm going to share two very bizarre.
And also, hi YouTube, for people who watch this video, please consider subscribe, like, and everything, because if I react to MrBallen video, I'm not gonna get any monetization. I'm not gonna get anything like that. He's the one who's copyright, and I don't hate it at all. I just want people to watch as my reaction. Also, consider like, comment, maybe that's so good or something like that.
Missing person stories, and they're both very unique. In fact, the second one is so memorable, I think a lot of you will retell it to your friends and family
Oh.
because the ending is unexpected to say the least and really paints a good picture of what.
Uh, if you told MrBallen's story to other people, I guarantee you 100% that it's not gonna work. Because why? He's so good at telling story that the moment you tell it, you don't have any confidence to say something stuff like him, like him. So it's like you tell something, but it's not gonna be that good. So it's gonna be a boring story.
Strange, dark, and mysterious content is all about.
Yeah.
But before we get into those two stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and
Consider
mysterious
like,
limited story
subscribe me,
format,
you.
then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and eat like 99% of all their ice cream, leaving just a very thin layer of ice cream at the bottom, and then place that nearly empty container back in the freezer. Also, please
I
subscribe
mean,
to
they
our
already
channel and
know,
turn on all
right? It's
notifications
not that
so you
bad.
don't miss any of
Okay.
our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
This one wasn't that bad for the like button, but okay. The perfect bait. What? Starting off with the perfect bait?
At around 1 a.m. on August 27th, 2000, a fisherman named Sam Watts did his best to keep his balance on the wet deck of the huge commercial fishing boat that he was working on. And as he tried to do that, he looked over at his crewmate, Michael Edwards, another fisherman, who was grabbing onto the mast as the ship rocked underneath their feet.
Mm.
Sam and Michael and the 4 other crew members on board this boat had just dropped their anchor 56 miles off the northeast coast of Queensland, Australia.
Real photo of Queensland, Australia. Oh, that's good. That's
And
beautiful.
up until about an hour earlier, the sea had been very calm. But now, this huge storm had rolled in, the wind had picked up, the waves were huge, and while the
It's a
4 other crew
profit.
members had already gone below to try to catch some sleep, Sam and Michael were now on the deck, doing their best to try to secure everything before they went down below. And so as the wind is whipping and the waves are smashing against the side of this boat,
If there's a wind that much, why is those guys already sleeping? Wouldn't they wake up and help too? Or maybe it's not that bad, and just these people overreacting and not going to sleep. Why though?
Sam and Michael decide they should split up to work more efficiently, where Sam will go to the front of the boat and Michael will go to the back of the
Eesh.
boat, and they would each
Eesh, that's dangerous in the middle of the night. Ah, no, man. You go. Whatever you go, I'm gonna go with you. Okay.
kind of work towards the middle of the boat, checking all the fastenings and the knots to make sure everything was good. And then when they reached the center, they
It's a
would be
joke.
good and they could go down below. And so they did that. Sam went to the front, Michael to the back. And as they began to work, they kept constant eye contact with each other because this was obviously a very dangerous thing they were doing.
Yep.
But at some point, as Sam was making his way, he had to duck down to check a particular fastening. And so when he ducked down, he lost sight of Michael just for a second. But in that split second, this huge rogue wave smashed the
Holy
side of the
fuck.
boat, practically capsizing it, sending
Hey.
Sam flying towards the railing. But Sam luckily grabbed onto the railing before
Okay.
being thrown
Okay.
into the
Luck.
water.
Luck.
And then
Luck.
as the boat kind of began to rock back to level, Sam instinctively looked back down the ship to look for Michael, and he watched through the darkness and the rain as Michael went careening off the side into the
Oh. Yeah. 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 You know what this remind me of? Remind me of when there's a video called there's a video who puts on like yo. Oh, the video like it's so creepy, right? And the job would put like $1 million a year. Would you work in this shop and this job? And then they show a video of like it's in the middle of the night and there's nothing in the ocean. The moment he throw orange out, it's gone. It's literally gone. And that video didn't even put the sound on. If I think if that video put the sound on and not putting the music on, it would be 10 times creepy, 1,000 times creepy, easily top tier. But yeah, it's remind me of that. It's really really creepy, and I really don't like it.
Ocean. He hadn't been able to grab onto anything. And so the instant the boat kind of leveled out again, Sam screamed for Michael, but he couldn't see him. And so he ran down below, woke up the whole crew. And so
Finally,
later, the crew was on the deck. They had their big spotlights out, scanning the water, through this big storm, looking for signs of Michael. And at the same
oh
time,
my fucking god. It's big storm too. It's not even a normal day. It's a storm day. I thought it was just a night.
the captain had come up and he was on the radio talking to police. And so
Oh
several
man.
minutes later, a police boat managed to come out to the fishing boat.
Oh,
And at the same time,
that's
the
good.
crew is still desperately looking for Michael. They haven't found him yet.
A royal
Now
photo of the police
began
boat.
circling around the whole area, calling out for Michael, throwing out buoys into the water in hopes of, maybe Michael sees one and grabs hold.
But
Nobody could
yeah,
find Michael. He
yeah.
was just gone. And so all that morning into the early afternoon, the police continued to look in the area for Michael. The crew on board the fishing boat did the same thing, but still nobody could find a trace of Michael. And so around noon that day, the search was called off. The police
Oh
told Sam and the
no,
rest of the crew
man.
of this fishing boat that unfortunately, at this point, it seemed very likely that Michael had drowned. And so, of course, Sam and the rest of the crew were basically in shock. I mean, this happened so quickly. How could it be that, Michael just a few hours ago was joking around with them, part of the crew, and now he's dead? I mean, it was just unbelievable. But now, unfortunately, Sam and the rest of the crew had to basically put their grief aside and make a very practical, albeit very cold, decision.
Go
Which
back?
was, even though Michael's dead, do we stay out here and
Nah,
continue fishing?
we
Or
should
because
go
of his
back.
death, do we just go back home? And you might think that decision was actually super easy to make.
Go
But
back.
Of course,
Yep.
they would pack it in and go back home.
Yeah.
How could you possibly stay out here and go fishing, considering what had happened?
I
But you
mean,
need
it's a dramatic experience, right? I know that they are fishermen for a reason. They need money to live every single day, so they go to go to do stuff like that every single day. Maybe, probably, I don't know, but still, often. Let's say it often. But you gotta understand how trauma evolved.
understand it cost a lot of money to go out on
Yeah.
these fishing excursions, and they had just left, and so they had not caught anything. So they had spent all this money and they had no
Oh,
return from
fuck.
it. And these fishermen were not wealthy. In fact, honestly,
See?
they needed the money from this trip just to provide for their families. And so if they did turn around right now, I mean, it would really hurt all of them, and it would also make it really hard to get the funding again to go.
I mean, I know it's a hard decision, but still, I think if I were on their shoes, I would probably still go fishing because, just like I said, it's really hard to decide, right? Yeah, but still, you need that kind of money. You need that money every single day.
Go out later. And so after some pretty awkward deliberation, the crew decided that, you know what, we got to stay out here and
Yeah.
fish. But the silver lining was, hey, if we stay out here for another day or so, maybe Michael's body will float to the surface and we can at least recover him and bring him back home to his family. And so all day that day, the fishermen stayed out and fished, and they were very successful. I mean, one after another, they were catching these cod that were 6 feet long and nearly 100 pounds. They're called flowery
Ooh.
cods. But despite how
I don't know what
incredible
that
this was
fish is,
for the
though.
business, this was not a cause for celebration because they had just lost their friend the day before.
Yeah.
So it was a very somber day, and all day, all the fishermen really are looking out at the water, hoping to see Michael's body. But, by the end of that 24 hours of fishing, they didn't see any sign of Michael. And so they packed everything in and they headed back to port. They sold off all of their cod that they had bought. And then each of the fishermen went back to their families and grieved the loss of their friend. A few days later, a factory worker was standing in front of a fish processing line with this huge 97-pound cod right in front of them. This is
Uh-huh.
one of the flowery cods that Sam and the other fishermen had caught
Yep.
24 hours after their friend had gone overboard. And so this worker took their knife and, like they did every day all day long, began opening up this fish. And at some point, after cutting it open and looking inside of this enormous cod, the worker just stopped and couldn't believe what they
Oh
were
my
seeing,
God, don't
and then
tell
they began
me.
to scream.
Don't
It
tell
would turn
me.
out, a few days earlier, after Michael had been thrown overboard during that storm, he very likely had been alive when he hit the water. But the area where they were fishing off the coast of Queensland, Australia,
Don't
was
tell me.
known for having lots of sharks and saltwater crocodiles in the area.
Oh
And
my
so pretty much
God.
immediately, Michael was attacked by either a shark or a crocodile, or maybe both. And during this feeding frenzy, as Michael's getting ripped to pieces, his head got ripped off and began to float away. And at some point, one of those huge flowery cods saw the head and ate it whole. And then later that day, Michael's colleagues caught the cod who caught Michael's head. And so that factory
Oh
worker
my
who opened
God.
up that particular cod
Oh.
saw Michael's undigested head looking up at her.
Oh.
Apparently his face was fixed in terror, with his eyes wide and his mouth open, as if his final moment had been him screaming.
Oh, nah. Real
Some of you
photo
might
of a
know that before
flower.
I became a professional, strange, dark, and mysterious storyteller, I was in the military.
Oh.
And while I was in the military, I definitely had some pretty wild experiences all around the world. But to be honest, what I remember most about my time in service was not any of my own exploits,
Nah.
but rather it was the insane
Oof. You know what? I really don't like this story. I mean, it's gruesome at the same time, but still, it's unsettling that kicks in. It's really unsettling. And also, the best part about this is that it makes you feels like it's annoying, but you can't stop watching at the same time. Just stuff like that. Uh, if we're talking about the favorite show that I really want to watch on MrBallen channel, it would be Abnormal Thing, like the story where you guys already watch it. I suppose so. The story where suddenly everyone die in the village, but at the end of the story, they discover that it's because of the booming thing, and it released some gas or stuff like that, and they at the end of the day they know because of that. It's and at the end of the day, it's not that scary. It's stuff like that. It's not
stories
these
I
kinds
heard
of shit.
from other service members. Keep in mind, military service members are sent to some of the most isolated, desolate, inhospitable places in the world.
Okay.
Many times in those places, weird things happen. Unexplainable things, like borderline paranormal things, happen in these places.
Yeah, paranormal have a set of skill. You know what I mean? They can become invisible. They can fly, flight also call it. They can stretch. They can chop themselves off. It's a skill. If you think about it, if you think about it as a game, it looks like a skill, even though it's scary because you didn't admit it. It's that it's a skill game. You call you call it like, oh, it's a normal thing. So the moment you think like that, it's gonna become scary. But the moment you think like, oh, it's just a skill, one of the skill, they have rank, they have skill, then it's not that scary anymore. Because that's the reason why I can tolerate that stuff, but not these kinds of things.
Being out in the middle of the ocean with absolutely nothing around, and seeing lights popping up in the sky and coming out of the ocean, and seeing figures up on the mountains wandering
Hey,
around where there shouldn't be any people. I mean, there are insane stories out there from service members, but many of them are not necessarily told in the public. They're kind of kept within the
yep,
military. It's like
it's thousands of story that kept everywhere. It's not just military, hospital, military, and street on the street, on the guild clan, some reason, on the families, one of the families member of the high up. You know what I mean? It's like those guys have thousands of stories to tell, but they don't because it's too scary or maybe it's too confusing.
kind of part of military lore. That is the premise of wartime stories. And if that piques your
Wow.
interest, well, you're in luck, because not only can you
Wartime story. Okay. I'm gonna check it out, but I'm not gonna check it out in this stream though.
right now go check out the Wartime Stories YouTube channel, but also I personally hand-selected wartime stories to come under the Ballen Studios umbrella, and we have collaborated to make a
Wow.
brand new weekly podcast, the official Wartime Stories podcast, which is available right now. Go look up the Wartime Stories podcast on any podcast platform. It's free. All you have to do is look up Ballen Studios and you'll find Wartime Stories.
I don't know. Podcast, the moment you listen to it and the moment you see it is different, you know? Like just you listen to it, you can't do anything other than that. So your attention is not that good at grasping the story. But when you see the story, when you see the person who speak the word, it's entirely different, right? It's
Or you can
entirely
direct
different.
search for Wartime Stories, click on it, follow them, and give them a listen. It's an amazing weekly show with new episodes coming out every single Monday.
Hmm.
Okay, back to the story.
Follow for exclusive stories. Stay forgetful. What? I,
On the afternoon of July 13th, 1994, a man woke up feeling very confused and disoriented, and he felt some pain in the back of his head. And as he
okay.
opened his eyes, he kind of slowly realized that he was on his back in a ditch on the side of the road, looking up at a big blue sky. The man
What?
tried to sit up, but as soon as he did, he felt this throbbing pain in the back of his head, and he reached back to touch it, but the second he did, it hurt even worse, and he
Ooh.
definitely felt there was a pretty big lump on the back of his head. And then when he brought his hands in front of his face, he saw he had all these bruises around his wrists that he had no idea what they were from. And so as this man in the ditch is trying to figure out what's going on, suddenly this older man who he didn't know just appeared by the side of the road and looked down and said, "Hey, are you okay?" And so the guy in the ditch is looking at this guy. He's got no idea who he is. And he wants to say, like, what's going on? Where am I? Who am I? What's happening? But he couldn't find the words. It's like he just kept looking at this older guy, looking at his wrists and feeling his head and having no idea what's going on. But then for some reason, 3 names popped into this guy's head. The guy in
What?
the ditch. He thought of 3 names. He had no idea whose names these were, but for some reason he felt like those names were really important. And so after a few minutes of awkward silence, as
See, I really hate these kinds of things because I'm jealous at the same time. I'm really jealous. It's like the power of mind, you know? I don't have that kinds of thing. The power of mind where you could remember something that is really important, you know? You don't know why it's important, but you know that it's important. I don't have that kinds of stuff. The moment I forgot, I forgot. I totally forgot about it. And even if I were to remember, I don't know if it's that important, so I just forget about it. You know? Like I'm really jealous of people who have that kinds of stuff. Like Jack Michael or something like that. That's their name. For example. That's the name that is a killer where you know where he is, but you don't know how you know. So you remember him, like suddenly you just remember him. But for me, I just forgot about it. I just totally forgot about it. The moment I don't think I remember him, he totally forgot about it on my memory. I feel like I'm so jealous about it.
the guy in the ditch is trying to talk, he finally just blurts out these 3 names. He says, Pat, Joel, Chris. And so the older man who had asked the guy in the ditch what was going on, he didn't really know how to react to this guy blurting out these names. And so he kind of ignored it and just said, okay, hi, my name's Steve. And then Steve, the older man, helped the guy from the ditch out of the ditch. And then once the man in the ditch was on his feet, kind of looking around, he looked at Steve and suddenly he could say other words. And he said to Steve, where are we? And Steve looked at him and said, we're in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Wait, really? This is a real photo? A real photo from Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Now, the guy in the ditch didn't know why, but he immediately felt like Wyoming had to be wrong. Like, there's no way he could be in Wyoming. But the guy in the ditch
See?
didn't know where he was supposed to be.
See? You know what I mean, right? Yeah, you know what I mean. It's like those kinds of things where I hate. No, I'm not hate. I'm jealous.
He didn't know who Steve was. He didn't know who Pat, Joel, or Chris
Okay.
was. And so it's all totally confusing. And so he just stood there kind of saying nothing. And as he did, Steve said, hold on a minute, I'm going to get my stuff. And so Steve kind of shuffled down the road like 10, 20 feet away, where there was a shopping cart full of cans, and there was a backpack and some other things dangling off the side. And as Steve grabbed the shopping cart, turned it around, and slowly began pushing it back towards the guy in the ditch, the guy in the ditch stared at Steve and kind of put together that, Steve must be homeless. And this realization made the guy in the ditch think that, maybe he was homeless too. And so suddenly, instinctively, the guy from the ditch began reaching into his pockets, thinking maybe he had an ID or something that would show him who he was, that would show he was not homeless, that he had a place that he needed to go to. And he reached in his pockets,
Okay.
but there was nothing. All he found was 23 cents and a comb.
What?
And so by the time Steve came over with his cart and
Did he
asked the
got
guy
robbed
from
too?
the ditch, hey, do you want to come to the shelter with me? The guy from the ditch was like, okay, yeah, I'll go with you. And then once the guy from the ditch and Steve arrived at the shelter, when they went inside, the guy from the ditch had to introduce himself to the people who ran the shelter. And so he made up a name combining one of those names that was running through his head, Pat, with the color of the desk of the person who was asking him for
What,
his name
Pat
inside
desk?
the shelter. And so he just called himself Pat Brown.
Okay.
And after Pat Brown got a room inside of the shelter, he went to bed that
Sorry.
night, still having no idea what was going on, but he felt confident, if I just sleep tonight, I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll know what's going on. I'll figure out, what happened to me. But the next day when Pat woke up, he was still completely confused, did not know who he was,
Wait.
had no idea what was
Did he just spawn there or something for some reason? Did he just like poop spawn there?
going on. But he had the wherewithal to know that, something bad must have happened to him, and maybe he should go talk to the police, because maybe they would know if other people were looking for him or something. And so Pat walked from the shelter to the police station. It was not far away. And he went inside, very politely, he walked up to the desk, he introduced himself to the cop who was on duty, and Pat just began explaining to the cop as much as he could remember. He said, yesterday I woke up in a ditch, I don't know who I am, I don't know why I'm here, I think I have amnesia, I just keep thinking of
He's good, he could explain something like that. He's actually super good. I don't know where I am, I don't know who I am. It's good.
3 names in my head, Pat, Joel, and Chris, but I have no idea what they mean. Can you help me? Now, the cop who's hearing this did not think, oh my goodness, this is totally legitimate. Let's launch an investigation to figure out who you are. Instead, the cop is like, is this guy on drugs? Is he mentally ill? What's going on with this guy?
For
But
fuck's
the
sake.
cop would say, Pat was incredibly polite and did not appear to be
See?
intoxicated.
Yeah, okay,
And so
okay.
the cop humored him and said, okay, you know what? Let's look through
Yeah,
these
that's good,
missing
that's
person
good.
reports
That's actually super good. I thought he was just ignoring him even though he's super polite, he's super confusing.
in the area to see if somebody matching your description, is a
Okay,
missing
get
person.
one
So the
W.
cop began going through the
One W.
database, but he couldn't find anybody that matched Pat's description.
Okay, get one out.
And so at some point he said, look, I can't really help you very much here because you're a grown man. You do not seem to be in distress here. And even though it's very unfortunate that you can't remember who you are or where you need to go or, where your family is, that's not really a police matter. But as he was saying,
How
this
is
to
not
Pat,
how is that not a police matter? Is it what? So it's not everyone matter then. You don't know who you are, you don't know who you are, you don't know where you are, you don't know where your family is. It's not a police matter, okay? It's not a police matter. It's your matter, your problem. So solve it yourself. What the fuck?
Pat, who's kind of crestfallen, he's putting his hands near his face and just kind of reacting to this news that the police are not going to help him.
Holy
The police
fuck.
officer says, hold on a minute, look at your hand. And so Pat looked at his hand and he saw, there was no ring on his left ring finger, but there was a pretty obvious callus where a ring should have been. It looked like, Pat must have been wearing a ring up until recently, and for some reason it was now off. And so the cop said, hey, it looks like you may be married or were married for a long time because you got that callus. But, beyond that, I'm sorry, there's not much else I can offer you. And so even though this was somewhat valuable information, it didn't really point Pat in any direction. And so he was about to turn and leave
Yeah.
when the cop said, hey, do you want to ride to the hospital? Because it seems like you could be having some sort of medical event here. But Pat politely declined and just told the officer to please be in touch with him if anybody came calling looking for somebody that kind of seemed like him. And the police officer said he would. And so after this,
Hey,
Pat left
hey,
the
that's
station
good.
and went back to the shelter and basically told himself, I'm going to stay here and just wait until my memory comes back. Because at this point, that was kind of
Yeah,
all he could
yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah.
However, weeks would go by at the shelter and nobody would contact the police looking for somebody like Pat Brown, and Pat wouldn't remember any more details. The only
I don't know if I want. I would have done in this situation. Where you forget everything. You forget even. I forget even what I have to say right now. Like if I were I am right now, I would just. I don't know. Start living there normally. I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to go out to search for myself to discover who I truly am, a god or maybe an almighty king or something. I don't want to discover that shit. It's too bothersome. But just I would just want to live like normal. That's it. That's it. So, but if I were to forget who I am, I would be pretty scared maybe, and I would want to discover who I am again. But again, it's a problem.
thing that kept coming into his head was those three names, Pat, Joel, and Chris. But that was it. And so finally, after a few weeks of no progress being made, Pat decided he would leave the shelter in Cheyenne and go to Jackson, Wyoming, because some other people in the shelter had talked about Jackson, Wyoming
Real
as being a
footage
place where people
again.
who don't have
Wow.
ID cards could get jobs and basically start over. And because
See?
Jackson was only a little over 400 miles away from
I mean,
Cheyenne,
he's better and quicker than me though. I thought I would take at least a week or two to get myself together, but he would probably be way faster.
and it was not unreasonable to try to hitchhike your way to Jackson. And so,
Yeah.
almost exactly 2 months from the day Pat woke up inside of this ditch, he began hitchhiking his way towards Jackson. And then when Pat got to Jackson, he was able to get a job without an ID. He got a job at a newspaper,
Smart.
sorting mail and doing some clerical work. And at first, he stayed in a shelter like he had in Cheyenne until he had saved up enough money to rent a room. And as the months
Holy
went
shit, he's fucking cooking.
by in Jackson, Pat did begin to remember additional details about what seemed like his former life. He discovered
Oh.
while doing clerical work at the newspaper that he was able to use
Okay, let me think. Is he able to use some stuff like machine or print machine, even though he doesn't have any knowledge of it?
an adding machine without looking at it. It was like his fingers just knew
Wow.
where to go.
Wow. It's okay. It's close enough. It's close enough.
He also discovered that he was able to do really complex math problems in his head. And then also, in virtue of being at the newspaper, he saw a lot of information about the stock market, and he actually seemed to know a lot about the stock market, even though he didn't know why.
Okay, I thought he was a math teacher, but no. Okay.
So while Pat was in Jackson, he started to feel this really intense compulsion to go to a Catholic church. And so he
What?
began going to Catholic Mass, and while he was in church,
Is he just started reliving his life again or something?
automatically began saying the prayers along with everybody else, even though, again, he didn't really know why he
Yeah.
had that information in his head. But the biggest
You know what this is? It's autopilot. It's called autopilot. If you let the autopilot on, you would probably set stuff where you normally don't know how to pronounce. You know what I mean? Even though gorgeous, let's say gorgeous, beautiful. I don't know how to write gorgeous, but I could just write it autopilotly. You know what I mean? But for me to pronounce and spell one letter at a time, I don't know how to do it.
clue that came back
That's
to
called
Pat while he
autopilot.
was in Jackson was this recurring dream he would have where he was at this campground somewhere and this little boy comes around the corner and looks up at Pat and says, "Hey Dad, Mom needs your help with Chris." And then
Wow.
in the dream, he responds to this child by saying, "Okay,
Joel.
Joel, I'll be right
Wow.
back." And so
Holy shit. I thought right. Joel was his son and Chris was his brother or something.
with all these clues kind of coming back into focus, Pat sort of felt like he had a grip on who he used to be. Based on the
Ooh.
callus on his finger and on that recurring dream, it did seem like he was a married man who had
Yeah.
at least two kids,
At
Joel
least?
and Chris, and so his wife was very likely named Pat, or maybe Pat was another child he didn't know. And then
Mhm.
also he felt like he must have been maybe an accountant or somebody who worked with numbers, based on the adding machine and understanding the stock market,
Yeah,
and complex
accountant.
math problems. And also, he was a devout Catholic because that's the only way he would know all those prayers. But despite kind of putting together who he seemed to be, and
I mean, I mean, it's a problem, right? It's a real problem where You already already lost contact with them for like a month or two, and they don't have any news. It's like we don't have any news. It's a big problem, and also I don't think they want to look at you that much. I don't think they wanted to looking for you that much because I don't think they even trying to look at all. You know?
his previous life, that didn't really tell him anything about what he should do now.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't know where his potential family was, or where his job was, or where he should go. And so, even though he had this kind of former life formed in his mind, he couldn't act on it. And so, Pat's weird life in limbo in Jackson, Wyoming, just kind of continued to drag on. And so by the end of 1997, so by this point, it's been 3.5 years since Pat has woken up in the stitch confused. He's still in Jackson, Wyoming. He still has no idea who he is. And it's starting to set in that unless he takes drastic measures here, he'll never figure out the truth about who he is. And so early in
Yeah, I
1998,
just want to say, why would you want to figure out your truth? But I think it would involve kids. It would involve his wife. So I think it would be a fair choice where he need to wanted to find. You know what I mean?
does take drastic measure. He contacts a very popular TV show at the time called Unsolved Mysteries and
Ooh,
asks them to
nice.
please cover his story, because if they did, it would be broadcast across the country and maybe somebody out there would recognize him
Yeah.
and come find him. And sure enough, when Pat contacted Unsolved Mysteries, they thought his story was totally insane and they covered it. Pat's episode aired on April 10th, 1998, almost exactly 4
Um,
years after Pat woke up in that ditch. And on the day his
what the fuck? I think that's long. That's too long, right? It's like 3 years, even after he explains it, and his story is actually a bomber. So what about the story where it's not bomber? Would it be taking like 10 years to air?
episode aired in a city in Indiana, 1,500 miles away from Jackson, Wyoming, a phone rang in a woman's house. So she answered
Oh,
it, and it was her cousin, and her cousin told her, "Stop whatever you're doing and turn on the TV. Put it on channel CBS." And so this woman, she walks into the living room, she turns on the TV, flips it to CBS, and she sees an episode of Unsolved Mysteries is playing, and it's Pat Brown's episode. And this woman is staring at the TV, and she practically faints when she sees what it's about. But she stays composed and just stands there staring at the TV, so shocked she can't even say anything. And the whole time her cousin is yelling through the phone, saying, "Can you believe it? Oh my goodness." And then at some point on the TV, a phone number flashed at the bottom of the screen where the
nice.
producers of the show told the audience, "Hey, if you know anything about this case, call this number." And so at this, the woman who's watching the TV, she hangs up on her cousin and she dials that number she sees on the TV. Pat's drastic decision to call Unsolved Mysteries would indeed solve the mystery of who he was. However, the truth about who Pat was is not what you think. It would turn out some of the clues that
What?
Pat had sort of naturally recalled in those 4 years that he was kind of figuring out who he was were indeed clues of his former life.
Yeah.
He really was a married father. Those three names, Pat, Joel, and Chris,
Wait,
those were
is he like an abusive father or something where they wanted to kill him? So I think they would want to kill him, but at the end of the day, he's still alive or some shit.
the names of his wife and his two sons. Pat was his
But his reaction at the police station says otherwise, right? He was polite. He was everything.
wife, and Joel and Chris were his two sons. And he really was a devout Catholic, which is why he was able to remember all of those prayers. But some of the other clues he thought of over those 4 years, like his incredible aptitude for math, or the fact that he could use an adding machine without looking, or the fact that he understood the stock market so easily, those were clues about his former life, but specifically, they were clues about why Pat was in this position in the first place. It would turn out
What?
Pat Brown was actually a man named Carl Brodnick Jr. And Carl Brodnick Jr. was a wanted felon who had misappropriated tens of thousands of dollars from the advertising agency where he worked as an accountant. And Carl had been under serious criminal investigation when he suddenly disappeared from his home in Indiana on July 8th, 1994, which is 5 days before Pat Brown woke up in that ditch on the side of the road with a lump on his head,
What?
on his wrist, and having no idea who he was or
Really?
Now, there has never been a perfect explanation for what actually happened to Carl, but if you think about this logically, his claim of having amnesia is very likely true. Why would a guy use amnesia as his cover story to flee the law, run to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and say, I don't know who I am, I don't know what happened to me, only to then, a few years later, go on national TV and out himself and totally make himself a target for the police? It doesn't make any sense. And then also adding credibility to this idea that maybe something happened to Carl versus Carl running off to save himself is we know that when Carl disappeared on July 8th, 1994 from his home in Indiana, he took out $1,000 in cash from his checking account and then also took out another large sum of cash.
But I think he doesn't have any money, right, when he woke up. So are someone robbing him?
From his home's second mortgage. However, when he woke up in that ditch, all the money was gone. He just had 23 cents in his pocket.
See?
Now, after Carl vanished from his house in Indiana, police did go looking for him because he was under criminal investigation, so they wanted to find him. And they pretty quickly found his car 250 miles away from his home in a strip mall parking lot in Missouri, but there was no sign of Carl anywhere. And then right after the police found his car, they checked Carl's credit card and they discovered it had just been used in Colorado, so 900 miles away. But when they went to that store and tried to find security footage of, when that transaction took place, there was no footage. And so there was no way of knowing if Carl really was the guy in Colorado making that transaction or if somebody else had his credit card.
I think someone robbed him just like I thought.
And then after that, there were no other leads. Nobody had any
That's the reason why he lost his ring. That's the reason why he lost his money. That's the reason why he looks like he beats up. Okay.
What happened to Carl? His family didn't know. The police had nothing to go on. And so very quickly, his case went cold until 4 years later when that episode of Unsolved Mysteries aired. Now, there are many theories about what could have happened to Carl, but the leading theory, that again is just a theory, is that Carl may have been in debt to some very dangerous people. And so when he fled his home... I don't think that's the good theory because, for dangerous people, the moment you in debt, you're gonna die. I'm sorry if I have to say this, but you're gonna die, bro. It's very likely that he was But he's not gonna die. He didn't die. Criminal investigation. He was actually running from these dangerous people. And that the reason he might have been stealing from his company was to pay off these dangerous people. But apparently it wasn't enough. Hence why he decided to just kind of take off and run away. And these dangerous people seemed to have caught up to him and they I don't think so. His wife, his kid, and everything. Why doesn't he take her to somewhere safe? Why wouldn't they take his car? Also, why wouldn't they kill him? It's a little bit of questioning. Him, and it looked like to say the least. His wrists at some point because of the marks on his wrist, and they very likely tortured him or something, hence why he had this very serious head injury. And then it seems like they dumped him on the side of the road, very likely. He didn't have any trauma too, he didn't have any trauma. He didn't have any big trauma where he sees something and he was scared. So I don't think so. They might have thought he was dead already, but he didn't. If you guys didn't believe me, you gotta try it for yourself. If you have feared of something, even if you forget that thing, you still feared it. And when he came to, he must have really had amnesia from the injuries he sustained from these bad people that chased him down. But again, that's just a theory. When Carl's episode of Unsolved Mysteries aired, it was his wife, Pat Brodnick, who was the one who saw him on TV and couldn't believe it and called it in. And then when she called this in, at first, Carl was reunited with his family and it was this big happy reunion. Carl comes back home, he sees his wife and his kids, and then he's immediately arrested and prosecuted for embezzlement. Now, ultimately, Carl would plead guilty to the charges against him, but he would say the whole time, I don't remember committing this crime. I don't remember anything. And so ultimately, Carl did not get sent to prison. He instead served time on probation, and then after it was over, he just went back to living as Carl Brodnick Jr., despite still having huge gaps in his memory, at least according to Carl. I mean, it's good. Even he could have planned it, he could have planned it. But at the end of the day, you know what I mean?
It's actually a good story, and it's actually a good setup. Is if he was the one who set up, okay. But if he didn't, the one who set up, he's lucky. He's really lucky. Thanks for watching. Stay cool, fam.